there of me doing a knife edge pass by the LSO platform. And there's a lot of the statements say, well, I got in trouble and the pilot got in trouble and was grounded, and that's not the case at all. It was actually the opening move to my at-sea flight demo. So I got away with a lot of stuff at that time.
It was a sexy looking thing. It was certainly a lot sexier than some of the other airplanes in the air wing. I also liked the way they were structured. It was almost like being in a motorcycle gang, only we fly airplanes.
How many Tomcat peeps does it take to change a light bulb? Scar?
I have no idea.
It takes 4.
4?
1 to actually change the light bulb, and 3 to stand around and talk about how great the old light bulb used to be.
I've got so many stories, you know, like I've got 9 lives.
When we came that close to getting killed, never knew it. It was bizarre.
As I turned around and kind of braced myself for the impact of the airplane, as it was breaking apart and just engulfing the landing area.
It was our CAG. He put together a team to lead the very first strike of non-stealth aircraft into Baghdad. It was crazy. The element that I led on the very first night of Operation Iraqi Freedom, you all probably know that as shock and awe.
Fun night.
Fun night.
So let's move backwards in time a little bit to, you know, one of the most iconic movies that come out, I think, aviation movies, is Top Gun. And obviously there's a new one coming out now, and hopefully from the trailer I see, it's got some awesome footage in it.
I'm one of the few folks that had the opportunity to be in the Top Gun movie and attend the Top Gun course.
In the 1980s, the F-14 Tomcat exploded onto the silver screen and became Hollywood's favorite fighter. Fans around the world would soon learn about those who flew her. Their bigger-than-life stories seemed like they were right out of Hollywood. The Tomcat would draw thousands of fans to air shows across the country.
My favorite thing about the Tomcat, I had great timing. I checked in and they had only the A models, and then our squadron, VF-24, was the first one to get the A+, so now I got to fly with the big GE motors, and then went over to be a RAG instructor right about the time the D was rolling out, and then got to fly the F-14D, which was just an amazing airplane. Tons of power, big GE 110 engines, and it was just a amazing airplane performance-wise.
The jet was a god.
And the new D model, it had all the electronic displays up front. It was just, it was a joy to fly. Of course, you know, we were young and getting the newest airplane in the fleet, it was really a pretty cool thing to be honored to be able to fly that.
A beast.
And then, of course, Smut and I got to fly that for the air show for a couple of years. So
There was only 2 crews on each coast. It was pretty exclusive to be one of the air show crews. So the West Coast, VF-124, our 2 crews handled everything west of the Mississippi, and there was lots of great shows. So.
Got the lines. Remember the speed tag? Yep, there's 90. Got the turn made. 0.65, 0.7. Wings are coming out. They're coming. 0.8. 68 degrees, 0.85.
in the Tomcat demo, the new D model, it was just overpowered and it was a rocket. So part of the maneuver, and Randy Pogo Clark designed this whole air show. So, and he was an ex-Blue Angel, so it was really an amazing show in and of itself. One of the maneuvers, you came by at just under supersonic. I think Smut was yelling .99, and that was my cue that I better start pulling up. We didn't want a repeat of the 70s Miramar Air Show where they went over UTC.
0.9, 91, 2, 95. Up we go. Not a blower. Hit it, then. Good roll rate. 1, 2, 3, 4. A little more, a little more, a little more, a little more. And out. Wings are moving. Okay. Wings should be out.
So So they oriented the show back east, and we started doing our high-speed climb and rolling all the way up, and we started having a fuel split. So we had to knock the air show off momentarily while we sorted out the fuel split, and then pick it back up kind of where we left off. We were up at altitude, so we had a couple seconds where most of the crowd couldn't see, and we sorted that out and dove right back in. So, you know, here we were back and flying the air shows and doing the circuit around the country, and we got asked to come do an Aspen air show.
Aspen.
And we thought, wow, we've never done an air show at a field like Aspen. It's in the mountains. It's going to be very tight maneuvering. And so we flew up there to do the first ever Aspen air show in the D model Tomcat. Plenty of power for the high altitude. So Smut and I took off and started this air show. A lot of mountains around, so we were supposed to be, you know, somewhere between 300 and 500 feet for the air show. And of course, the better the crowd, the lower we got. And the problem in Aspen is that the terrain went up on both sides of the runway quite steeply. And if you went off to the west side of it, the vertical was, you know, pure vertical. Off the left side, it went up about 300 feet, and then it leveled off in their houses. So there were some famous people in the audience.
We're in that 6G burner turn, and he's changing elevation of the aircraft. And you know, when you're a backseat guy, whether you're a student or instructor or a fleet guy, you don't ever want to hear the pilot saying any dirty language, because that's usually something bad with the aircraft. So I hear, God damn it. I'm like, what? He's like, look at the size of that, in the 6G turn, look at the size of that pool down there. I'm like, oh man, he was an amazing pilot. So
we were flying in this, you know, 360 min radius turn, and the houses were quite impressive. And I think we were probably
big pools,
50 feet tops, 90-degree angle.
Whatever the legal minimum was.
Well, the train went up. We were doing our level turn. We weren't climbing the turn, and it was impressive.
Mingle and stuff. I don't think we met Goldie and Kurt though.
They left, but there was plenty of other nice people to meet in the crowd.
Yeah.
I had a good time there. The air show was quite a fun tour. Every weekend, a different spot. Got to go on the road, and of course, we were young and crazy and single, so the times were good. You really thought you were pretty cool.
We were pretty cool.
And you weren't cool, but you thought you were.
The geopolitical tensions between the Communist Soviet Union and the United States gave rise to the Navy initiating the Naval Fighter Experimental Program, VFX. Grumman Aerospace Corporation won the contract, giving the Navy the most advanced technical fighter in the world, the F-14 Tomcat.
I spent my life and my joy of my Navy career flying the mighty Tomcat. I first met it when my father was a test pilot at Grumman. So when I was in high school, I went out and went to Grumman at Bethpage, and they had a full mock-up of the F-14. And I saw it in the special lighting and hangar and everything. They were trying to sell the airplane, etc. And I said, holy shit. Wow, what a great airplane. The Tomcat is unique. It has a presence, it has panache. And when you see that airplane, you know it's something like that has never been around and probably won't be around again. So I had the joy of flying it for 24 years and wound up being the high time Tomcat pilot with almost 5,000 hours in it.
Dave Cully, call sign Possum. Got that call sign at the Oak Club one night, another long story. I had about 1,100 carrier landings in the Tomcat and about 42 or 4,300 hours. Pretty sure I'm the high time guy in the world, maybe an Iranian. Maybe Snort would challenge me on that. We'll see. We'll break out logbooks one of these days. And then Let's see, Darth would probably claim he had more, but he logged 2.5s in the FSLP pattern with students, so I'm going to discount him. You know, what I really liked about the Tomcat, I figured out, okay, I don't have the eyes to be a pilot. It was a two-position aircraft, and obviously, when it got into the strike role, I still think it's the best strike fighter in the world. And of course, I'm biased to the Tomcat. I was never a big Hornet guy. But you'd really work together, get that crew coordination going that we all talked about, and once you had that, you could make things happen. When you can anticipate what the guy in the front or the back was doing, and you knew exactly what was going on. And going back to Top Gun, that was one of the great things. You've been flying with the same guy, you're just really tuned up, flying every day, and real challenging flights.
Hi, I'm Roger Box, and I checked out in the F-14. And to start this off, I'll tell you that I was the first commanding officer at Top Gun. I was not the originator, but I was the first commanding officer. I helped transition it against a lot of forces in the Navy because we were too successful and it looked like we were having fun. And God knows anytime you're having fun, you're doing something wrong by somebody. We were having fun, and we flew the little stripped-down A4s to simulate MiGs, and the program was very successful. One of the reasons that we became a command and I became a commanding officer was that Top Gun, as organized and ran by my predecessors and continued by myself, was a very successful program.
So, way back whenever I got selected to go to Top Gun, and it's a pretty good deal. First day, I don't know if you know Wizard McCabe. Wizard's the XO, and he goes, hey, by the way, before anybody leaves, we've got a writer that's going to do an article about guys going through Top Gun, a crew. Who wants to do it? And after being a savvy guy, knowing that, hey, public affairs, you can't win and sure can lose, everybody avoided eye contact. So finally, Wizard goes, all right, this is for California Magazine. This kid, or this guy's name was Ehud Yanni, is going to write this thing, Israeli guy. So West Coast, you guys are doing it. Who's going to do it? Again, nobody volunteered. And then Wizard goes, hey, Street calls you SoCal, how come? I said, well, I went to Corona del Mar High School and UCLA. And he goes, you guys are doing it. So we ended up doing this thing, talking to this guy every day. Comes out okay, and actually having the movie created over an article. And there's like 4 things that are real in the movie, as you know, and the rest is history.
Back in 1980-something, a long time ago, I was in the RAG, the Fleet Replacement Squadron for the F-14. And I was one of a bunch of students that were kind of hung up in training. And they came out and interviewed a bunch of us because they wanted some real guys in the movie. Like we were real, we were students in the F-14 RAG. And I was the only one of the students that was tall, dark, and handsome, okay? And so I was selected to be in the movie, which I thought was, pretty cool because I knew nothing about movies. I'm just, a Tomcat guy trying to, figure my way out and fly the airplane, blah, blah, blah. So I'm on the set, this is my job. I'm on the set for 6 weeks, and that is my job full-time, all the time. And what was very interesting was all the cast and crew wanted to kind of hang around with us after the set, after the shoot and all that good stuff, because they wanted to be just like us, okay? I had 0 hours in the airplane at the time. I kind of knew how to put my flight suit on and kind of looked the part, but I didn't know much. But the actors and the actresses, they were really into us because we were real, we were genuine, we would do all this stuff. And the 4 of us students that were in the movie, we kind of would get together and kind of go, hey, if we don't tell them, they won't know. We might be ace of the base and all that good stuff. So we walked around that set like we were somebody, like we were special, like we were, all this and that. And then we were invited to the premiere, and we sat down and watched the movie for the first time, and that was the first time we'd seen the story. We walked out of the film like, wow, we somebody, because this was really cool. All the stuff that they shot in all these different, different locations around San Diego, different scenes, none of them done at the same time. When it all came together, we were like, oh man, this is really cool. And what was very interesting was, that day back in 1985, which turned into an 86 release, I knew every time that movie came on for the next 30 years, because every time it was on TV, every time it was anywhere, people were knocking on my door, saw your movie last night. And I'm like, yeah, my movie. I'm in the back row looking with my shades on and just blending in. But it was pretty cool to be able to say that, hey, I was a part of that movie. That was really amazing. But 3 years later, I was offered the opportunity to attend the Top Gun class for real. And I'm telling you, what I thought was the best 6 weeks of my career, you know, while we were making the movie, because that was fun, that was cool, you know, it was cool. But going through the class was intense. It was the best flying that I'd ever been a part of. All day long, all we did was think tactically, you know, in the books, in the theory, in discussions, jump in the airplane and turn that theory into reality. Going through the class, I was like, wow, this is the science of fighter aviation. I mean, it really gets down into the nuts and bolts and some really cool stuff. And when I left the class, going back to the squadron, I felt like, man, now I really have something to offer all those around me, because I know a lot more. You know, for the next 30 years, I got to share stories about, one, being in the movie, and two, being in the class for real. And, you know, it was, you know, very rewarding.
Grumman had a history of providing combat-proven carrier fighters for the United States Navy, which they named after cats. The Tomcat was the last of the great cats that spanned over 66 years protecting the fleet. There were only 6 naval aviators who had the distinct notoriety of flying all the Grumman cats during their naval service career. At 96 years young, Commander Glenn Tierney is the last living aviator that holds that honor.
I did fly all of the Grumman cats. I flew something like 40 airplanes. Every Navy fighter, from the F-4F on up to the F-14. About a week before I retired in '71, I'm back at Patuxent River, Maryland. And my boss, Admiral Hank Miller, I hear him say to a bunch of guys in the running room, well, we got this tired, all beat up, I think the 3rd model off the production line at Grumman, F-14. We're going to fly it back up to Bethpage and turn it back in. If anybody wants to check out on it, why, let me know. So I'll go. Okay, it's by 5 days from retiring. And so he said, okay, all right. He said, now things were pretty loose in the fighter community on stuff like that. And maybe they still are, but they were then. He said, go through the handbook a little bit, find out how to run a wing back and forth. Somebody will give you a cockpit checkout and go out and fly it around for an hour and a half. He said, but keep one thing in mind. Do not come back without the airplane. So I paid attention to that. So that's how I got my 1.5 hours in the F-14. Well, like typical dumb fighter pilot, you always like to say, oh, I flew that. You know, I flew something like 40 airplanes over a period of 30 years.
The Navy's preeminent fighter had already served the fleet with distinction for over 20 years. But an unacceptable gap loomed between the A-6 Intruder's phase-out and its replacement, the F-18 Super Hornet. The Tomcat stepped up to the plate and fulfilled the Navy's heavy attack requisite.
If you look at the Tomcat, you know, it was in the fleet for 30 some odd years. So in the early 70s, you probably heard others talk about the fact that that airplane was built for fleet air defense against the Russian hordes coming over to attack the carrier. And it was designed around the weapon system, around the Phoenix missile system. So you had a long-range missile, you had a long-range radar, and really that was all the airplane was focused on. But once the Soviet threat went away, the aircraft kind of languished. It was a fighter role, but you look at all the conflicts that we had been involved with since the 80s, and there was really no adversary that would put up a fighter threat to you. It really didn't exist. So the Tomcat was kind of in an awkward place. We filled a fighter role, but we may not have filled a very as full a role in the air wing as we could have.
I'm the fighter wing commander, and I'm a brand new guy at the desk, and they talked to me about putting a lantern pod on the Tomcat. They tell me how we're going to do this, and I said, absolutely, I'm all in. So I took 2 or 3 guys, a couple maintainers, technician kind of guys, and then I took 2 guys that were test pilots, a test pilot and a Rio, who were op-eval kind of guys from VX9.
Up to Point Magoo at VX9, lucked out. I ended up getting into what's called the Lantern Pod. What I ended up being the operational test director. Hear me talk about it today, it sounds like I built it in my garage, but really Snort and Rat Slade were the ones that had actually, had done the proof of concept.
The engineers from Martin Marietta, then Lockheed Martin, in the process turned into Lockheed Martin, they were amazing guys. There were like three of them. And between my 2 guys and those 3 guys, 5 guys, in 6 months we went from a concept to dropping an LGB.
Op away. Good radar track on the item on profile 3.2 to target, 2 miles to target. Good energy, 1 mile to target. And mark impact, sir. Laser safe, please.
And then, and a lot of things fell in our favor. One was we put a new P-TID in the back cockpit, put a big new display, a 12 by 12 display, and the magnification of the lantern pod is directly proportional to the size of the display. The same display in a Strike Eagle with an 8 by 8 display was 8 power. We had 12 power. So the magnification and it had a lot of pixels in the new display, so the clarity was awesome.
And then they brought it up to us at Point Magoo to do the operational test. I didn't have to go through anybody. I could just call the engineer at Lockheed Martin and say, hey, it's not doing this, it needs to be doing this, and we got a great product.
So we won out with that. And then the second thing was GPS. Because we were an analog airplane, we had an INS, but we couldn't talk to the thing, and the pod needed to be a digital event. So we weren't a 1553 bus type airplane then. So, and we couldn't tie the radar. We didn't have a ground mapping radar, so we didn't have a radar that we could layer into the feed information to the lantern pod, so we can say, okay, point the pod over here. I said, can we put like a GPS unit in the thing? And he went, wow, that's a good idea. Literally in a week, they figured it out. They got a GPS unit that was off the shelf, that was going in Apache helicopters, embedded it in the lantern pod, which was awesome because it stabilized the lantern pod. You didn't have to have an INS and all that. We did that, and then we made it work, and it's amazing. I dropped the first live GBU on the bombing range and blew up a tank. And then the A6 was going away, and the Hornets just had the Nighthawk pod, and that was not very good. So this brought a brand new capability, and so we just won a couple things, happened to turn out and turned the airplane into a national asset at the end. And for a guy who was a fighter pilot and I don't want to never drop a bomb, then I became the true believer, and I believe I truly helped bring this along. So so we got the project, then we had to pay for it. So I go up and I talk to PMA 242 up there, and I go up there, well, okay, what's it going to cost us? Like $1 billion. A lot of money to integrate this whole thing across the board. And I go, oh. Well, what do we have in the books? Well, we're on the process of spending almost that amount of money to put AMRAAM in the airplane. And I go, we don't need AMRAAM. I got Feeny bombs, I got Sparrows. I've been trying to shoot down somebody with a missile for my whole life, and it's not happening. I said, we need to go kill people on the ground. Let's take the $1 billion and put it in the lantern pod, forget AMRAAM. I go see all the 4 stars, and I give them the brief. And the last thing they say, that's awesome, Snort. How are we going to pay for it? And I told them how to pay. We're going to pay for it, and they went, cha-chang. And so every sync called Washington and said, make this happen now. And so we did this fleet prototyping thing as opposed to a normal acquisition process. So we went from a handshake on trying to make it happen at Fighter Wing, the 2 days after I took over, to 1 year later deployed it with BF-103.
They had max takeoff gross weight was up to about 76,000 pounds off the carrier. You could carry 2 GBU-24s, precision-guided munitions, self-guided, self-lasing, that made the Tomcat the weapon of choice for the CAG, Carrier Air Group Commander.
And then toward the end of the Tomcat career, it transitioned into a very, very capable air-to-ground platform. And over that 32, 33-year career, it was probably the last 10 years that it became the most significant aircraft in the air wing.
And that was, in my opinion, the coolest thing I ever did. Made me, I go to bed at night going, oh, it's good. So that was a thrill to have that happen. And then it proved to be an awesome airplane. We turned into FAC-As, we turned into FAC-A machines, and guys in the squadrons we became the platform of choice. We became pathfinders for Hornet squadrons. We even had one Tomcat would go out with 3 Hornets or 4 Hornets and go, there's your target, and then they'd use a laser spot designator, laser spot tracker to find that, and they go, that, I got it, I got it, I got it, and then the Tomcat would pick its own. So amazing, amazing story that the Tomcat really turned into a true national asset at the end of its life.
I had the great fortune of being the XO of the top hatters during the Kosovo crisis. And during that period of time, during Allied force, the entire air wing was focused around the capabilities of the Tomcat. The Tomcat had a Lantern targeting pod and had, for about 5 years, experience with it and had trained the people into how to use that targeting pod and was very capable at performing the air-to-ground mission. It was a transformational shift, not only for the community and also the airframe, but also for naval aviation, because we had a capability that the Strike Eagle, the F-15E Strike Eagle had, and no one else had. And it was really a significant game changer for the Tomcat. During Kosovo, there was one particular mission that really kind of stood out. If I can give the background, the Air Force was up over working over the northern part of Yugoslavia. The Navy was given Kosovo as its primary area of interest. And there's a little country called Montenegro right off the side. And there was an airfield that supported aircraft flying over and striking innocent civilians. And they were the ones that the U.S. and the NATO forces were there to protect. And we would see them come over the border, and we did not have authorization to go into Montenegro. The situation was such that you had this airport, or this runway, and you had a bunkered hangar facility inside a mountain. And so they'd pull out of the mountain, they'd launch, they'd strike, they'd come back, and they'd go back inside the mountain. So they were never out in the open. And we got presidential approval to go in on one strike. And there was a 24-hour period that we were able to do this. It was offered to the Air Force, and the Air Force declined. They didn't have the time necessary to do the planning required to pull off this strike. And Mad Dog Copeland, who was our battle group commander, pulled everybody together, the CAG and all the strike leads, and said, "What do you think? Can we do it?" And we all said yes. And so we accepted that mission, and the strike lead was given to a Tomcat. And the whole air wing was built around the Tomcat lead and the fact that we could bring a 2,000-pound precision penetrating weapon, the GBU-24, and that would be able to penetrate through what was an air conditioning duct into this hangar facility and be able to destroy what was in it. We had the precision capability and we had the weapon. And the strike, it was an alpha strike. Every airplane that was in an up condition, we launched. And we had 4 waves of packages going in over Montenegro, which was heavily defended with SA-6s, which is a nasty weapon. And the Prowlers were shooting harms in to suppress the surface air threat, and the Tomcats were leading each of the 4 elements. And by the time we came through on the second wave, missiles had made it into the air conditioning duct. And as we were approaching it, you could see the effects of what happened when that got in there. It ignited an enormous firestorm that blew out these big, heavy steel doors, and so everything that was in there was absolutely destroyed. And then all the other targets went out after that. And the Navy, within a 24-hour period, was able to get everybody in there, everybody out, destroy the target. But the Tomcat led the way, and the Tomcat had the only capability that could have pulled that off. So that I'm very proud of.
The strike roll was not the first addition to the Tomcat's combat repertoire. Battle group commanders require timely tactical reconnaissance information. The Tomcat's capability of entering a hostile battle space at over 2 times the speed of sound made the F-14 the perfect platform to carry the Tactical Airborne Reconnaissance Pod System, known as TARPS.
I remember it was a TARPS mission. This was my last cruise. We were doing Operation Southern Watch, so Iraq had been divided into Southern Watch and Northern Watch, and it seemed like every other day the guys up in Northern Watch were dropping bombs at the drop of a hat. You know, a herd of sheep would move and they'd bomb something. And we never got to, even though they would take a couple pot shots at us or something, and we never did a response for whatever reason. That had kind of gotten under the skin of the admiral. He had seen a kind of a weird image of something that he thought, and some other people in the intel guys thought, was a possible missile launcher on the Al-Faw Peninsula, which is the little jut of land that sticks just real southern Iraq, in an area where they were not supposed to have any weapons whatsoever. So the admiral got it in his mind that we're going to get a picture of that thing, and if it's a missile launcher, we're going to go in there and take it out. I was tasked with taking a picture of this thing, and so I briefed this with a Hornet guy, and I wanted him to fly kind of high cover above me so he could look down at me and the ground in case it was something and they started shooting at us. We'd at least know what was going to happen. The plan was to go out over the Al-Faw Peninsula with the rest of a regular, what we would call a box package, a big strike package. Only at the last second, about 10 miles north of this thing, I was going to roll inverted, dive down to what was originally 15,000 feet, and take a picture of this thing and go right back to the ship, and so they could download the tarp spot and get the picture, so the admiral could, plead his case to the higher ups about taking it out. And so I briefed this Hornet guy, who I would characterize as not the sharpest knife in the drawer, but a nice guy, meant well. So we go out, we launch. Well, actually, before that, we're sitting on the deck, and this kid with a whiteboard comes up and holds it up and goes, Admiral, I won't use his name, Admiral so-and-so now authorizes you to go down to 12,000 feet. And then a couple of minutes later, obviously he ran over to tell the spare the same thing, and then the spare comes up on the radio and says, hey, you can go down to 12,000 feet now. And I'm like, yeah, I know, let's not talk about it on the radio. And so then about 5 minutes later, we're still running our onboard checks and doing all of our pre-flight stuff, and the kid runs over and holds up the thing, and now it's like 10,000, you're authorized down to 10,000 feet. So I'm like, okay. And I could see him running over to the other airplane. I'm going, God damn it, don't start talking on the radio about it. Sure as hell. A minute later, hey, Sludge, your admiral says we can go down to 10,000 feet now. And I'm like, yeah, we're helping them dial the manual mill settings for their gun sights now. Let's kind of keep it quiet. We go out, fly over this thing, and it's just basically a waypoint. I can't see from where we're ingressing at about 25,000 feet. You get about 10 miles north of this thing, and kind of at the pre-brief signal with this Hornet guy, it's basically we'd just both roll inverted, roll, point right at the ground, and then level off at 10,000 feet, and just scream right over the top of this thing at the speed of heat. And we get the picture. I look over, and there's the Hornet guy right next to me, and he says, hey, I'm like, dude, you're supposed to be up here kind of helping me not get my ass shot off. Anyhow, it turns out this whole thing, after this whole evolution, the photos that we got were not good enough to break out exactly what it was. So they ended up moving a satellite over it, and it ended up being a palm tree that had fallen over like an outhouse-shaped building, and so that from the sky, the previous pictures made it kind of look like a SAM launcher, with a big long missile sitting on it. It was like all this for nothing. What a huge production! But it was pretty funny after we found out what the thing was. It was a palm tree.
To me, when I look back on my career in naval aviation, or really, I wouldn't say career, my participation, my involvement with this passion that we call naval aviation, really stems from the DNA that kind of came inside of me. And I think I share this with other Tomcat guys that I know, other naval aviators that I know, who had the pleasure of having their fathers or their uncles or their grandfathers be part of naval aviation. And it's a bond that I think we all share, but to me it accentuated the real benefit of what we do, which is part of such a unique elite group of men and women now that can call themselves naval aviators. So to me, one of the biggest enjoyments that I have now, looking back on my time as a naval aviator and a Tomcat pilot specifically, was being part of this family, this naval aviation family. And my father and older brother were both naval aviators, and I had the unique privilege in my first squadron. Bad Bob was my skipper, and his dad and my dad were both naval aviators. In fact, not only were they both naval aviators, they were wingmen in the Sundowners together. So it was called VF-11 and then VF-111 Sundowners. But back in World War II, McCourt and DiMatteo were wingmen in the Sundowners, and then fast forward 60 years and their two sons are wingmen in the Tomcat. And so it was like the Wildcat and the Tomcat, the first fighter and the first cat and the last fighter and the last cat. And in doing that film with both my dad and Bad Bob's father, you realize there's so many things that stayed the same. The technology was drastically different. The airplanes were catastrophically different when it comes to performance. But the passion, the aviators themselves, the attitudes, the passion, the heart of what they wanted to do and why they did it were exactly the same. So that was, to me, one of the most enjoyable things that I've done. Probably also one of the more dangerous flights that we ever did. I was as a young, I think I was a Lieutenant JG flying the Tomcat, and we were flying with Bad Bob on a Wildcat. I don't know what we were in a dive, would probably get 175 knots or miles per hour back then in those planes. And I just remember Bad Bob saying, hey, let's sweep our wings back to get a good shot of this, and pretty much departed the airplane, I think. It looked good on film because it looked like I was rolling away, but in actuality, I had fully departed the aircraft.
Growing up as Air Force brats, we grew up with our father flying fighters in Vietnam, and he flew the legendary F-105 Thud. So there's no doubt in my mind that when it came time, I was going to be flying some fighter of some kind.
I remember one night, and we were living in Japan in 1966, and he came running up to tell me, he says, Dad's been shot down. And I wasn't even sure I knew what that meant at that point as 5 years old, but he got picked up overland by the Navy. And so we, as paying the debt, the most expensive debt for our father, had both joined the Navy to fly, and then we both wanted to fly F-14s.
The deal was cemented when I was in college because I went to spring break, went to see Dad. Sure enough, Dad goes, hey, have you seen the new movie Final Countdown? And I said, nah, I haven't seen it. He goes, we gotta go check it out. So we checked it out. And man, when I saw the Tomcat and the wing sweep back and going shooting down 2 zeros, it cemented the deal. I was like, yeah, I'm gonna be flying that airplane off the Nimitz. And believe it or not, years later, I found myself in that airplane being shot off the deck of the USS Nimitz.
So not only did we both get the opportunity to fly the Tomcat, but we actually got to fly the same aircraft together on a number of occasions. And it's typically not done in the military because of the famous Sullivan brothers that were all killed during World War II because they were attached to the same ship. So they kind of frown on it, but they had a waiver for us to fly together on a couple occasions, you know. And a number of people had asked me, was it weird, wasn't it flying with your brother? And I remember in anticipation, we thought it was going to be strange, but as soon as we got in the airplane, brought the canopy down, started the engines up, it was just like you're flying with anybody else.
Yeah, and then I just remember saying, man, you believe they're paying us to do this?
I've heard a lot of people talk about why they got into naval aviation, and I'm probably not too different from many in that I was the son of a naval aviator, fighter pilot during World War II, and I grew up in his shadow. Had 4 kills during World War II. Flew off off Guadalcanal with the first Navy group that had flown off there, Fighting 5, and had 3 kills off Guadalcanal, 1 off the Saratoga, and he himself was shot down off Guadalcanal. Was able to dead stick it in, and so as a little kid, I grew up reading his logbooks, seeing the green ink in the old logbooks, and I knew really early on that was something I really wanted to do. So I might have been 8 years old, 9 years old, and I thought, I want to get into naval aviation, and particularly fighters. I had the great fortune of going through flight training in the 1983-84 timeframe, and the Tomcat was the premier fighter at the time, and that is all I wanted to do. And oh my God, you would work harder than anybody else. You would fight harder than anybody else just to get that opportunity to get selected into jets and then fight your way into the Tomcat.
I grew up around naval aviation. My father, Bud Flagg, was a 2-star Rear Admiral Naval Reserve, an F-8 high time Crusader pilot. So I naturally followed him to be an F-14 pilot on the West Coast. Sadly, on September 11th, 2001, my mother and father died aboard American Airlines Flight 77 when it was commandeered by terrorists and crashed into the Pentagon.
9/11 marked the beginning of what would become the longest war in U.S. history. The War on Terror in Afghanistan.
I can hear you, the rest of the world hears you, and the people who knock these buildings down will hear all of us soon.
At the twilight of her 30-year career to the fleet, the claws of the venerable Tomcat would once again be unleashed.
We were fortunate enough to be crewed up together in VF-102, the Diamondbacks, when 9/11 went down, and we got deployed a week later on the USS Roosevelt, and we were again the single Tomcat squadron. And unfortunately, we had a lot of the newer innovations that were added to the Tomcat. We were flying the B, which had the bigger engines. We had some enhanced raw gear, went bigger and better. We had the Lantern FLIR pod, which was an excellent pod that allowed us to do some air-to-ground delivery. We carry every kind of weapon, and we even were able to carry JDAM, but we mostly carry precision-guided bombs for our deployment. Had some extraordinary missions there early on with very few friendlies on the ground. We had a pretty liberal rules of engagement where if we saw contact with the enemy, we were pretty much cleared to engage them, which led to some really interesting missions.
We had some danger close radio traffic where we had some special forces guys on the ground that were actually being chased by Taliban convoy. So sometimes the big machine can not be as flexible as you want to, but that day we all kind of worked together with the Air Force tanker, dragging us closer to the action, the AWACS getting us permission to deviate from our assigned plan. Everybody, the Air Force, Navy, came together, and next thing we know, we're full afterburner heading to try to help the Special Forces guys on the ground. When we got there, it was convoluted because even though the rules of engagement were liberal, you still have to get a positive ID on the combatant versus the friendlies. And there, it was such a dynamic situation that we couldn't tell who was who. I mean, we assumed that the person being chased out front from our perspective was the Special Forces. However, we couldn't, they were pretty busy, and we couldn't get radio contact with them. Finally, when they got a spare moment, they radioed up, gave us positive identification on who they were and where the combatants were, and then our entire job was to stop the convoy. Hooked it there, stabilized, Scar's got the target, and then the gonculator, you know, the computer's figuring it out, then all of a sudden we see time to release -3, -4, -5, and that's not what you want to see. Because we didn't have time, these guys were close to the Special Forces, we had to stop them. And then, you know, not a practice maneuver. I don't think we'd ever done one before, but all of a sudden, you know, a steeper approach is gonna bring that counter down. So then it's just a full -G bunt, and then everything starts floating up in the cockpit. I see binoculars and some other stuff. I mean, we could go into that.
The Tomcat was not designed with any kind of bathroom facilities, so all we had for options was to hold it or carry these little bags that have like a dry powder that when you have to relieve yourself, it turns into kind of a jelly so it doesn't go flying all over the place, and it seals up. And Big Don had this habit of doing that every time we went flying. Whether, you know, he drank a lot of water, stay hydrated, so the first thing off the cat usually as we're heading up to the tank was, I'm gonna go ahead and relieve myself. So he already done that. I think he even done it twice on this particular mission.
Usually so right on join up and then right at tanking, like during the tanking evolution.
So now we get back to our mission where he goes -G forward, and what happens?
So then everything's floating up in the cockpit. I see binoculars kind of flying next to me and everything. And then all of a sudden we stabilize, and I think it was roughly a 45-degree dive. And all of a sudden I feel it's like a warm compress on my neck. So the piss bag, it was floating around, one of them had just like landed right on as we're doing our target run. Stabilize, think, wow, that's interesting. And then time to release, 1, 0, release. And luckily that one went high order, and the entire convoy was stopped, and the special forces ended up being okay. So that's definitely, without a doubt, my most memorable.
For a variety of reasons. But we were able to drop all of our bombs. We actually only had a 2-plane on that one, and what we had to do pretty much was, while one was tanking, we would be doing our work, and so we were the first ones to drop, while the other guys were going ahead and top off. By the time they came back, we dropped all of our bombs, and all we had at that point was bullets, which don't typically get used a whole lot. You know, there was no air-to-air threat, so at this point, that's the only thing we have. And this convoy was a really, ragtag. There were a lot of civilian-type vehicles that were militarized. They had, you've seen the pictures of we called them clown trucks. There were Toyota 4Runners, but in this 40 vehicle train, if you would, there was a tank, an actual military tank that was chugging along, and I remember all the dust coming from that thing. Well, when things started happening, you can imagine everything kind of dispersed. Well, that tank tried to sneak off, and it, of course, wasn't going really fast. So this is the one time that we thought, this is the time to use the bullets if we can. So we chased him down, went down a little bit lower than we might have, should have, but at this point, there was really minimal surface-to-air threat for us. So he got his dream of actually strafing a tank, a live tank. And not sure if you saw anything come up as far as direct hits, but it stopped.
Right, yeah. We stopped the tank with the Mike, and it rolled in, so that was...
At that point, we have no bullets. We go get some gas. Our other aircraft had come back. He's doing great work. Again, both aircraft were FLIR capable. And what was great was the AWACS was just sending Hornets and from the both aircraft carriers that were there. And so all these Hornets were showing up, and they had the Nighthawk pod, which they didn't quite have the resolution of the Lantern pod. And the beauty was we were just overhead, and we had the targets, and so we ended up buddy lasing, where we were lasing from our aircraft. We had their code for their bombs. We'd put that code in, and we'd laze, and they'd actually drop their bombs, and we would laze for them, buddy lasing. And we did that a number of times. So while we only dropped 4 bombs that day, we actually facilitated the drop of, I don't remember how many, teams. I'm sure it was 15.
It was a lot. We lost count.
And we ended up, how many times did we tank that day? Probably.
It was 4 times.
4 times.
So,
and we landed probably 8.5 hours after we took off, and it felt like we'd been airborne for 30 minutes.
Yeah. That was an exciting mission.
It was a really good mission.
The mighty Tomcat, the F-14D, was an amazing aircraft. It's unfortunate we didn't build more of them. They finally put everything together in one aircraft, and it not only did it have great engines and great avionics and a fantastic radar, it also added something called Link 16, which is a data link. And the data link was able to allow us to see like our tanker from 1,000 miles away. The one thing we were missing, though, was the ability to drop GPS-guided weapons. You needed to have that precision for a variety of reasons. One, you have to make sure you hit what you're aiming for. But secondly, for all the political reasons, we only wanted to put our weapons where we were supposed to be putting them. And so for those reasons, we knew going into potentially this big buildup for the beginning of Operation Iraqi Freedom, if we didn't get GPS capability, we weren't going to play. We would do some good work, but it'd be later on. The folks in NavAir, the test community, quickly gave us the capability, literally weeks prior to the kickoff of OAF, to drop JDAM. I had never dropped a JDAM, ever. The first time I did was that first night in combat. It was crazy. At that time, Captain Mark Fox, who was a MiG killer, was our CAG. He put together a team to lead the very first strike of non-stealth aircraft into Baghdad. And we were told to go after some very difficult targets. So the element that I led was ended up being the first non-stealth aircraft to enter the Baghdad missile engagement zone on that very first night of OAF. You all probably know that as shock and awe was the expression that was used for the beginning of that evening's event. Nothing goes as planned, and myself, we were in 2 Strike Tomcats and 2 Hornets. We were being protected by 2 Prowler aircraft. We had 4 Air Force F-16 CJ protecting us into that SAM ring, and then we also had 4 harm shooters off of our F-18s off of our carrier. All that was put in play and in motion for us to be able to penetrate. They called it the Baghdad Super MEZ. MEZ is an acronym for Missile Engagement Zone. So what happened is as we take off, everything's going to plan except the tankers started to break down. And so what happened is for our strike is we started losing some of those critical assets. We lost several of our harm shooters, and there had to be flex that happened during the time that we were headed to the target. The ringside seat, if you can imagine over Baghdad, you could see the city lights, and as we were headed in, the Tomahawk missiles were exploding. So as we're on a middle of the night, coming in, seeing all these explosions going off, talking on the radios, and then all of our command and control folks, the Air Force and the E2s got saturated because there's a lot of activity. And as that's happening, as soon as the Tomahawks ended, the surface-to-air missiles and the AAA came up. And so as we're getting within about 40 to 50 miles of our target, we just start seeing SAM launches. And we know that we're the very first ones in the MEZ from the south, the Super MEZ. At the same time, B-2s have come all the way from Missouri, and they're coming in an opposite altitude, hitting similar strikes to us, 180 out. So because of the tanker problems, we couldn't get the right assets in place, and so we delayed, and at a certain point, I was the mission commander of the element, we decided to go in, and it was quite a fireworks display. The SAMs were not guided well, which was fortunate for us. We didn't lose any aircraft, but it was pretty dang scary. And I remember at the time thinking, okay, we've flown over Iraq lots of times. I've seen a lot of AAA go off. I'd seen some SAMs, but I'd never seen the onslaught of the barrage. We were successful. We dropped our weapons. My pilot, Webster Frankenberger, did a phenomenal job. He's an extremely talented fighter pilot, and we came back and trapped. And I was proud to be able to do what I've been training to do for 18 years to that point.
And as beautiful and combat effective as the Tomcat was, she was also very unforgiving, especially at the boat.
It was difficult to bring aboard the boat and look good, but it was easy to bring aboard the boat and look bad. So you could get aboard very easily with it safely, but it was a handful.
So the one thing I didn't love about the Tomcat was the difficulty coming aboard the carrier. But again, you always knew you were alive when you were flying the Tomcat.
The fact that it was like flying a high school gymnasium half full of water behind the ship. It was a hard airplane to learn how to fly well behind the ship. And then, of course, the famed TF-30 engines that were only supposed to be in them for a couple of years and ended up being in them for most of the, well, certainly all of the A's life cycle, which was upwards of 20-something years.
Anyone that tells you they haven't been scared getting the airplane aboard at night, I would say they're either lying to you or they're not really bright.
I loved day carrier landings. Once you got good at them, it was a challenge. You know, you had to be in touch with the airplane. So it was a challenge to land well in the F-14. I didn't like landing at night, but I'm probably not alone in that.
The LSO's primary responsibility is an individual that gives up part of his day instead of flying to sit out there on the end of the carrier and provide that safety valve to the naval aviators that are landing their mighty warships aboard the carrier. I had a lot of respect for the Tomcat. It was a very challenging airplane, very powerful airplane, but you had to stay on top of it. At that time I was flying the A model when I did my cross-train in the TF-30. And it was one of those airplanes that you really had to respect. You had to maintain the airspeed. When that airplane would get underpowered, it would pick up rates of descent that, frankly, if you didn't arrest it quickly, it was unrecoverable. One of the big things as a LSO that we monitored was meatball, lineup, angle of attack. Meatball is the glide slope, angle of attack was the airspeed of the airplane, and lineup was keeping the airplane on center line. Tomcat had an amazing large wingspan. The only thing second to the Tomcat in wingspan was the E2. So it was critical to keep that aircraft on center line. Generally plus or minus 3 feet to make sure safety margins are maintained. It was some years later when I had an opportunity to fly the Hornet, and I in fact was qualified as an F-18 pilot at that time and joined the Air Wing. It was a squadron LSO, and we had a turnover of the senior LSO, the CAG paddles, and it's the carrier group paddles. And I was asked if I'd step up and assume the senior LSO responsibility. The deck was moving around a little bit, and that kind of gets in a pilot's head. And we had a few pilots that had some challenges. And one of them was Lieutenant Matt Clare, a Planet. And I recall him having just a horrendous day. Landed well short. Did get his hook across the ramp, but he was a taxi one wire. And there was considerations not to even let Matt fly that night. Unfortunately, the leadership made a decision we were going to fly him, but they also made the decision that I was going to waive him. And I said, no problem. I'll waive Matt, and I can control him. And it's a partnership you have with every pilot on the carrier that, I'm there to help you on those dark nights. I'm there to give you those little sugar calls, power calls, lineup calls that you may need, that you may get, not realize that you need to make. But there's a partnership between me and the pilot to keep them safe. I'll never forget that night after, a challenging day. Everybody was going back out there. It was the first event. It was just after 9 o'clock. It was so black. I mean, you could not have made the sky blacker or darker. And the deck had a nice, steady pitch up about 10, 15 feet. It would hang up there, it'd set, and then would settle down about another 10 or 15 feet. And as a pilot, you can see that out there, way out there, 5, 10 miles. You're looking at that deck, and you can see that shape, that rectangle out there, and it's the only point of light source that you have. And it's tempting to just stare at that, but we were always told, get in the cockpit, get on your instruments, don't transition to that outside scan until you get into 3/4 mile and call that ball. And I saw Matt out there. He was the first guy down. We purposely had the lineup. We have the JBD jet blast deflector right behind us, and we had grease pencil. We'd write the names up there, and I saw Matt, 111. He was the first aircraft coming down, and I knew that. We wanted to get him down first because if he had challenges, we put him in the downwind pattern, we tank him, we bring him back around, and give him a couple laps. But I told all the paddles. Pup McFadden was out there with me. I'll never forget Pup. He was a E2 paddles, and I said, Pup, I want you to back me up. He was a pretty senior LSO, had a wing qual. Airplane was coming down the chute, getting ready to have some words with him, and he called the ball, or his Wizzo. It was Dean Fuller, Dino, was in his back seat, and you recognize voices, and of course I recognized Dino's voice. And Dino made that call.
Nice. Correction line 111, 3/4 mile, slightly above, slightly right, call the ball.
111, Tomcat ball 70.
Ball 47.
You only have about 30 seconds, and in fact I recall it being 25 seconds. And I rogered the ball, and immediately I could tell he was just a little bit underpowered, so I gave him, you're a little slow, as I recall. 2 power calls.
John, slow, so power back on. Power.
And then immediately it was 4 wave off calls. Wave off, wave off, wave off. And when you hear the airplane, you can hear that TF-30 has a whistle about it. When that aircraft rolls back, that motor rolls back, you know you got to be on top of it immediately. And so while I did give him a little power, or you're underpowered, or little slow call and a couple power calls, those 4 wave off calls had to be acted upon immediately. Unfortunately, Matt had made up his mind that he's not going around. It's dark, and he did not want to go around that night. And he'd had a bad day, and landed short, and he was going to use that same technique at night, and it just worked. It wasn't going to work out for him. And I can remember holding that handset in my hand, that pickle in my other hand, squeezing that pickle, turning those red lights on, which is a visual indication to the pilot to go around, immediately at full power. But I could hear that TF-30 rolling back, and it's just a whistle. You just hear it getting down, coming down, and I just could not believe what was happening in front of me. And I walked out to the length of the, I'll never forget, I walked out to the length of the headset cords, and the only thing that was holding me in position not to walk right out in the middle of the landing area was the fact that the tension on those cords were holding me into position right across the scupper. So I was out in the landing area, and I just couldn't believe what was happening. He just kept coming. He kept coming down, kept coming down, kept coming down. Meanwhile, Brick Hunters was in the back, called the Peanut Gallery. Got a number of guys out there that want to come out and just watch the show, you know, watch the airplanes coming down the pike. And he grabbed, he's seen it immediately.
Power, wave off, wave off, wave off, wave off. Fuck. 99 signal Delta. 99 signal Delta.
It was just the most horrendous thing I can ever remember in my life. A little emotional. Shipmate. You get personally involved with these guys. And Matt, unfortunately, would not survive that night. Aircraft impacted right at the round down, broke in half. I was standing right there, and it just got really hot. I may have had said a curse word, the F word, as I turned around and I kind of braced myself for the impact of the airplane as it was breaking apart and just engulfing the landing area. In fact, I carry catch myself here. I carry a little reminder every day. I get a little scar on my arm here. The TF-30 fan blade left its mark on me. I was looking down at my feet, and the airplane was FAMO, and it's full ammo. Sidewinders, Phoenix, Sparrow, as I recall. The airplane was completely loaded with weapons. 20 mic, and I'm looking at my feet. I'm trying to discern what I'm looking at. It's part of a belt of 20 mic ammo and the warhead off of an AIM-9. And I hear this voice behind me, "Let's get out of here." And it's Puck McFadden, and I don't even recognize him because it was just so hot. And the scuppers were full of jet fuel, and the flight deck was on fire, and there was just pieces of airplane everywhere. Thankfully, we were able to expeditiously clean up that flight deck, get a couple wires stretched across the deck, and start recovery. And we were able to recover 17 airplanes without issue. Didn't fight a single motor, and it was a tough night. And it's July 20th, 1993, forever be seared in my heart.
Fighter pilot Bud Hesterman explained the ejection process best when he said, "Being born and having to eject from your aircraft are somewhat similar experiences. When you're forced to leave a nice, warm, and comfortable environment and find yourself in a cold, noisy, and unknown place, of course it's going to be unpleasant." Unfortunately, Tomcat crews would go on to experience that rebirth phenomenon a lot.
So on the 13th of April, 1986, I became a member of the Martin Baker Tie Club. Martin Baker makes the ejection seats for the F-14 Tomcat, and to be a member, you have to have a successful ejection. So what happened is it was the very beginning of workup. I was in VF-41, and the first thing we do is carrier qualifications, and that involves some briefs. We talk about emergency procedures. We show the crash and burn flicks about what's happened to other people in the past. A lot of people usually go, ooh, ah, some people start laughing and stuff like that. And we go over emergency procedures, lose an engine off the catapult, and the other one we discuss is if you don't have flying speed to get airborne, you got to make the decision to eject before the airplane leaves the flight deck, because once the Tomcat's tipped over about 5 degrees, you're out of the envelope. And what that means is, you'll get ejected out, but you won't get a parachute or a full chute, and you'll get essentially catapulted into the water by your rocket motor, and you'll probably break your neck. And so with that in mind, we were operating off the coast of Norfolk. Again, it was April, decent weather. And I did my day work. I got a couple, some traps and some touch and goes. Of course, the trap is with our hook down, and we catch the, one of the 4 resting gear wires, ideally the 3-wire. And then my plan, man an airplane on the flight deck, take off, turn downwind. They'll hook us in about 4 miles, and we come in and land. So that's exactly what we did for our first night trap. Came down, flew a pretty good pass, caught the 2-wire, and actually got a decent tug on the wire when all of a sudden we lurched forward. And it's almost like going over a speed bump and then being on an icy road. And because we weren't stopping and we weren't decelerating anymore. So I thought I could stop the airplane because, like I said, we got a decent tug on the wire. So I jammed on the brakes, pulled the throttles back to idle, but I saw the deck edge lights coming up, which marked the end of the angle deck. That's about all you can see at night. And so I said, so in real time, it was, we lurched forward, 1 potato, 2 potato. I said, oh shit, eject, Hal, eject. And what we teach guys is on the second eject, that's when he pulls the handle. So he pulled the handle. And how the ejection sequence works on the F-14, first the canopy goes, and then the backseater goes, and he goes to the right. And about a half second after that, the front seater goes, and he goes to the left. So the deconflicts the ejection seats. Hal actually got about half a swing on his chute, hit the flight deck pretty hard. For me, again, my hands are on the stick and throttle, my feet are on the brakes, and I'm looking at the deck edge lights coming up. And the next thing I know, I get a bright orange flash, which was the rocket motor, my ejection seat firing, and then everything went dark. I couldn't see anything, I couldn't hear anything, I couldn't feel anything. It felt like I did a somersault in the air, and what I was told later by the physiologist is that was because, it's an instantaneous, I don't know, 50 or 60 Gs, and so all the blood goes rushing out of your head. But then the chute opened up, and it's like the lights came on. And I looked over and I actually saw the Tomcat. It was tipped over, but it was still on the flight deck. The nose wheel had actually got caught in the scupper like a gutter at the end of the angle deck. And of course, my first reaction was, oh, doggone it, I forgot to turn off the external lights. Because that's what we're supposed to do when we land aboard the ship. There's a little pinky switch on the end of the throttle. We're supposed to shut off the external lights. So I thought that, 1 potato, 2 potato, hit the water. I heard a pop pop, and I attributed that to this new device we got called Seawars. It's a saltwater activated release system. What it's meant to do is release you from your parachute risers automatically, because in the past they've had people get knocked unconscious during ejections, and then the parachute drags them under and they drown. So my immediate concern after hearing the pop pop was, I was pretty close to the carrier. I was probably 30 feet away. And again, people have ejected close to the boat and got sucked under by the vortex of the propellers. Thankfully, that didn't happen. And so the carrier goes by, and eventually the helicopter came over. It was only about 5 minutes. At that point, I'm looking up. Of course, the helicopter is very loud. He's hovering right over top of me. They wheel us up. The helicopter goes back to the flight deck. Next morning, I went down to the helo ready room to thank them for fishing me out of the water. So I'm thanking them, and they said, yeah, we were a little concerned because when we came over you, your chute was fully filled with water right underneath you. And we were worried about it potentially dragging you under. And I said, well, yeah, I felt it a little bit on my legs, but not too bad. And the rescue diver says, yeah, it's a good thing I released you from your chute when I did. And my jaw dropped, and I go, what do you mean you released me from my chute? It released automatically. And he goes, oh, no, sir. You were still attached to your parachute risers. So that was a big lesson learned, trust but verify. The pop I heard was actually the life preserver inflating. I had the first Seawars failure. So later on, I was talking to all kinds of people about that. But the bottom line is afterwards, for our seat mechanics, the tradition is you give them a case of beer. They got 2 cases of beer. Everyone on the helo, the tradition is they get a bottle of their favorite beverage. I hand-delivered that down to Jacksonville. But I'll tell you, after that, when we would prepare to go out to the carrier and we'd show the crash and burn flicks, I quit laughing, because when it happens to you, it just gives you a different perspective about what could happen.
Probably my most memorable Tomcat flight was the one where we ended up in the landfill. I just finished up Top Gun ground school, hadn't flown for a couple of weeks. It was at night. They're right there at Miramar. And we take off, turn right down into the pattern, and we'll just do an FCLP's field carrier landing practice. So on the first pass, a little high overshooting start, add power, turn back onto the center line, and look down, I get a flash of a left fire light. Look down, come up on power on both engines, flick, 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 left fire light comes on. We're doing 140 knots, 400 feet AGL, everything looks good, so we just start going through the procedures. Left throttle idle, turn the air source off, 130, 120, stage afterburn in the right engine, plane yaws just like you'd expect over a little bit to the left, and add a little bit of right rudder, and 110, 100, I call to eject, and Bosco pulled the handle. Airplane rolls off, we're a 45 to 60 degree angle left-hand bank, so if Bosco goes out and up, I go out and down. Bosco thinks he's dead twice because as he goes up, he doesn't get a chute because it's not until he starts coming down does he have opening shock. So he opens up, then he looks down and says, oh crap, I'm gonna land in the fireball. So he reaches up, tries to pull the four-line release, and we land very close to the fireball, the wreckage there in the dump. So the time from the canopy going to the time that the seat-man separation, I know I blacked out, and it was like the hand of God on you as the crushing, G-forces of the ejection seat. My chute opens up sideways. I go down and I see the ground. It was at night. I see the ground because the airplane hits and explodes. And then I hit the ground. As he hits the ground, we were there standing there together. The next day, I was at the squadron. We get there at 7 o'clock in the morning. There's a representative, Martin Baker. Martin Baker is the manufacturer of the ejection seat. And he's there handing me a tie. And he goes, Pete, he goes, I was digging in a hole 2 years ago and watched 2 more guys come in and I'm almost in the exact same hole, and all 4 guys are dead. You're standing here receiving the tie. They got an airplane the next day. We were flying within 6 days after that and on cruise in 10.
There's one thunderstorm and there's no wind, so guess where the carrier is? Right under the thunderstorm to make some wind. So it's beautiful and they say case 3 and it's like, wow, that's weird, case 3. Oh yeah, okay, I guess it's gonna be case 3. Just then, if you remember the stall logic, I think it's like dividing by 0 with TIT. So the thing is going off, do-do-do-do-do-do-do to the pilot, and I go, hey, how is the engine? It's stalled. It's stalled. It's like, well, if it's stalled, shut it off. So he shuts it off. Actually, there was nothing wrong with it. The stall logic was screwed up. So we come in, and now it's single engine, all these checklists, you go back, combines hold, and you go back, flipping around in the PCL like a madman, coming in, shooting our approach. I looked up, I'm going through the things, and I look down, and we're about 800 feet with about 500 VSI going straight downhill. I'm like, pull up, go to mill. And he goes, I am. I go to burner. So we climbed out, almost flew in the water, 15 miles behind the boat. Come in, I think Brutus was the rep, comes up, hey, did you try relighting it? I'm like, capital idea, let's try that. Start it up, that's still stalled. We come in, 4-degree glide slope, high as a kite, single engine bolter. And I was like, this isn't gonna be good. We made it, came around, trapped the second time. Our wingman goes, hey, what were you doing when you landed? You looked really weird. And I said, well, I didn't want to screw up my back. So I came off the angle like this. And that's, fortunately didn't have to punch it out, never did.
For Tomcat crews, if it wasn't the enemy, or landing 23 tons of metal aboard a floating runway trying to kill you, you could always count on the weather to make it even more challenging. As if bringing the Tomcat aboard the carrier wasn't hard enough, Mother Nature had the habit of testing just how good you really were.
So our adventure started in the Indian Ocean in 1989. We were in VF2, flying off the Ranger one evening, and it was a massive thunderstorm in the North Arabian Sea. There's no way we thought we were going to go flying that night.
It's blue water ops, so no diverts anywhere
or at least
close
they
to
told
carrier.
us that anyway.
So yeah, we head out to the jet. As Rico was saying, he stood underneath while I did the pre-flight and got soaked, and we both got soaked. Get in the jet, and we're thinking to ourselves, in fact, we're talking to ourselves saying, there's no way we are going flying tonight.
Right, because the recovery ahead of us, nobody could get aboard. It's raining, the winds are out of limits, and we're just sitting there going, no, we're not going flying.
Lightning in all quadrants. It's like, this is just going to be an event of start it up, and then the adult supervision will come and say, let's do a kank.
Right, and then the next thing you know, the director runs up, and instead of shut it down, he's like breaking it down. And we're like,
Means uh-oh.
And I remember we're just going to respot the deck. That's what they're doing. They're
Yeah.
taxiing us forward to respot the deck because nobody's going flying in this weather.
So sure enough, they taxi us to the Cat, and the whole time Rico and I are going, this is not really happening.
Right. When they ran up with the wakeboard, I went, uh-oh. So
we're going flying.
Right. So this is going to be a good sea story, but it
Yeah.
turned out to be a great sea story.
Well, yeah. So off the Cat stroke, I don't know if you remember, something on the LOX bottle disconnected. So suddenly I'm sucking no air. So after I get the gear up, the mask comes off. So that's maybe the first indicator that this might not be a normal flight.
Right. And then they vectored us out to do just a quick AIC hop. You haven't had a night trap in at least.
That's probably
that was your night to get back in qual.
to get back in qual. So here it is. We are getting thrown around pretty good. In fact, I would say I wasn't pretty much flying the jet. I was holding on because we were getting thrashed pretty good throughout this embedded thunderstorm that we're flying through.
Right.
No kidding. We break out, and almost by the time we got to the outer station, they said, "Come on back." Now we have to dump 7,000 pounds of gas, and the whole time I'm dumping, I'm going, I don't know if I should really be doing this, although we have to get down to a max trap weight.
Right.
So I have to do it, but something in all the little hairs are going, you might not be wanting to dump as much as you have to, but anyway.
The thing I remember is you going, you know what I think I got? Vertigo. And I'm thinking as a Rio going, oh, I don't want to hear this.
I do remember though, having flown through bad weather before, that was the most violent weather that we came through, literally just getting thrashed about.
Right. But they vectored us right in on final.
Flying in the needles, on and on, looking good. We break out, and I look up, and I don't see anything. And I call Clara, back on the needles, working hard, on and on. Look out again, don't see the ship. They go, you look good, keep it coming. And something out of the corner of my eye, I turn, and the ship's over there. And we're pointed that way. So I knew the winds were pretty much out of limits, but I go ahead and make the play, and the LSOs see that, pickle, get out of here. So we wave it off and tell us go to 1,500 feet.
Right, we're
low holding
forever.
Yeah, and there the Odyssey almost begins.
Right.
Because now it's a matter of patience, which we were eventually going to lose a little bit of.
Right.
But we sit there and wait as they get the plan together to now launch tankers to take everybody else to Masira, I want to say.
Right.
Our divert field, which is, I don't know, 500 miles away, 400 or 500 miles away. And there we sit.
Right. And the next thing you know, it's we need gas, and we need gas now because the low fuel lights are coming on.
I want to say we got down to 2,000 pounds. And I want to say 4,500 pounds is our on deck at nighttime. So we get down around 2,000 pounds, and Timmy Schaefer is in an S3, and he comes up and says, I got 1,000 pounds to give. I just got done tanking somebody. And Rico is on it like white on rice. He goes, we'll take it. Where you at? So we go ahead and join up on shaft, or plug them. We're getting the gas, and the plan is now starting to come together. I'm starting to feel a little bit better because the Maxi A6 is now joining on shaft also. So it's going to be perfect. We unplug. There's the tanker. We go ahead. He brings the chute out, and boom, we plug him. It's pretty much, we're in and out of cloud. It was just the most challenging tanking I've ever done because it's nighttime, you're in and out of the clouds, in and out of, lightning all over the place. And
you plugged first time, it was a good one.
It was good, but it was not your standard hit it and see a little recoil. It was just put it in there. And he goes, I don't show you in the basket. Yeah. Okay, so we pull out, plug him again.
Low fuel lights are coming on again.
Yep, because this has taken some time. He goes, no, I don't see in the basket. I'm like, hey, okay, unplug. And this time it's cannonball
pager,
coming.
hit that thing as hard as you can and push it all the way up in there.
Boom, hit it, and that sine wave on the hose, I was I was hoping that it wasn't, when it came back, wasn't going to rip our probe off, which has happened before. Not to us, but to other airplanes. So there's no question we are in the basket.
No flow.
Yeah, he goes, sour tanker.
So I said, recycle one more time, and he put the basket in and let it go, and the whole thing came out and went into the ocean. So at that point, it was like, these things don't happen to me. These things happen to other people. That's what I was thinking about.
We realize now that we're not going to get gas from this guy. What popped into my head was the fact that due to weather avoidance, the A6 tanker pilot had gone wings level. So now we are 30 miles away from the ship versus doing the standard cruising around on top of mother. So you know she's right there, 30 miles away. So I look down and go, okay, great. And I look over to the gas, we're 1.8, 1.7. And it's like, okay, this is not gonna help the situation. So we turn, now the big cell is between us and the ship. So we have to go around that cell. And just about that time, CAG comes up and goes, we're gonna have to barricade you. And disbelief. I was like, are you kidding me?
Me too.
Barricade? That's, do they think we can't get aboard? Well, I mean, what's going on? And he explains, hey, you hit the magic number, we got to do it. Okay, so they start briefing us on what we're going to do.
I remember we're supposed to jettison our tanks and all our ordnance. I said, I'm not going to do it.
Yeah, no, I mean, come on.
I know my pilot will get me aboard.
Absolutely. So we're getting the brief from CAG Paddles. Steve, call sign Steve.
Go ahead and give me one more 360 here, Tom. The barricade's not ready yet.
We're coming in. We're probably around 2 miles, maybe 2.5 miles. And they say, well, why don't you give us a 360?
Right. They had rigged the barricade upside down.
We did not
needed to re-rig the barricade.
We did not realize that at the time, but we're like, oh, okay. So here it is. We go through, do our 360, and we're now getting into around 2 miles. Hey, Pager, why don't you just give us one more 360?
Right. And that's when Tom came up and said, you got to take us now.
Well, they're still in the port turn there. I'll let you know what they expect of us. I have to take me now. Yeah, you got to take me now. 300, Roger, come left now.
And at that point, I went, wow, this is an emergency.
The barricade's not ready yet.
And this is, as we're halfway through the second 360, CAG comes up and goes, save your fuel state. And I knew at this point, just because Rico had been as cool as the other side of the pillow the entire time, just low key, but he comes up with 900 pounds, and you could almost hear the disgust and the, come on guys, you got to get something going here.
What's your state, 200? 900 pounds.
So at that point,
we just flew our own VFR pattern behind the ship.
Absolutely.
We didn't listen to anything they said at that point.
So it was like, hey man, take your knee board off, tighten them down, because now I looked over, the tapes are pretty low. And I remembered, what's it, like 300 or 400 pounds gauge error per side. So we're approaching where we're on fumes. And I said, hey, Ricky, since I have the mask off, dangling still, and it's distracting to talk as you're trying to fly to final. And so I just said, hey man, I'm gonna fly this thing until I can't fly it anymore. If something goes on, i.e. if we're getting in close and we flame out a motor, I'm just gonna yell eject, eject, eject. I'll continue flying it as best I can, but you're gonna be the one punching us out. So at that point, I hadn't even thought about that prior to.
Right.
But then it's like, it's go time now. I mean, there's no turning back. And
as you look at the plat tape, you can see when I called the ball, the stanchions are coming up and the barricade had just gotten rigged.
It literally was coming up when we were probably at the 3/4 mile point. So 15, 20 seconds before we land is when they finally QA'd it and said, okay, the big steel cable is not going to be at head level like it originally was. They flopped it.
We have Taos contact. I'm working just a little low there. Keep working it over to center line. Okay, we got a clear deck. Call the ball. Center Tomcat ball 6-0. Okay, roger ball. Go over to left a little. Bring it left. Talk in that lineup. Up left a little. Nice and easy. cut. Good barricade. Good engagement. Nice job, Pager.
Targeted the one wire, landed, and our night was over.
I think we both ducked when we went through.
Oh yeah, it was like something.
The barricade.
It was just a reaction, because suddenly you see something, and we both kind of did that. I'll never forget Munch, our maintenance officer, was the first guy to meet the jet, and he's like, "Hey, I'm gonna have him drain the fuel and see how much flying time he had." I'm like, "Munch, I don't want to know that.
Yeah.
I don't want to know that at all." But then, of course, he comes back and goes, "Yeah, like 90 seconds of flying time left." I'm like, "Hey, I appreciate that. I thought I said I didn't want to know that."
I just remember trapping and looking up at the island, and it was just covered with people.
Oh yeah.
Everybody wanted to come out and see the Tomcat kill himself.
Yeah. So we get back to the ready room and filling out the reports. So it's probably by the time the reports are done, 2 a.m, and I look at the schedule. I'm on the first brief in like 4 hours. I'm like, are you kidding me?
Right.
No medicinal brandy, no
Right.
nothing. It's I'll get 3 hours of sleep, and he's like, sorry.
Yeah.
That's
Would
the
you
only spot
remember
I
the
had.
XO told us to go down to medical? We had to give blood because it was a mishap.
I guess 30 plus years of the Tomcat, this was the only night barricade.
Right. I think there were 3 total, and we had the only night one.
So we got that going for us.
Which is
nice.
All of us guys were brand new out there, and it's Blue Water Certification Day. And the last launch of that whole evolution was the 5 JOs in both squadrons launching, and the ship rolls into a fog bank. And we're all airborne going, how are we gonna get aboard? Because first time down that night, or that evening rather, it wasn't even night yet, 3/4 of a mile, walks off. Cold ball, Clara, wave off. Didn't even see the lights. Go back around again, and Nasty, who was waving us, says, we got you, keep it coming. Clara, keep it coming, waved off. Second time around, I barely saw the wave off lights. Third time around was a charm. We just kept it coming, flew the needles all the way down to touchdown, and they just talked to us all the way down, and next thing you know, boom, we stopped. That's when I discovered that the Tomcat needles went away when you crossed the ramp. That gave me a great amount of confidence in our abilities aboard the ship as Nuggets. Had a blast.
It was one of those hops where the weather was bad and getting worse. Southern California, I want to say mid to late June, so the June gloom, had a little rain. The ship was moving around trying to hide and get away from the rain. And we thought, as we did our brief, that we were not going to go fly. So as it happened, we briefed. We assumed we were going to get canceled. We got dressed. We assumed we were going to get canceled. We walked. We assumed we were going to get canceled. And boom, off the front end we go. So we take off. And we head out. We can't conduct the mission, and so we get a 99 recover call. 99 means everyone who's airborne hearing this transmission, it's time to come back to the ship. So the 99 call will come out. It's just a basic general transmission to get everybody on the same page, headed the same way to Marshall to come down the chute. And Marshall is where they stack up all the airplanes, and each airplane comes down at about a 1 minute to 2 minute interval down for their pass to land. I'm a new guy. My Rio happened to be a guy by the name of Mike Vogel, call sign Ninja, and unfortunately for him, he drew the short straw, and he was flying with the new guy in some really bad weather. So we go to the Marshall stack, and we're waiting to come down, and the whole time Ninja is just trying to make sure his new guy pilot stays calm and concentrated and focused coming down the chute. So we push over and we come down the chute, and over the radios you hear 99 taxi lights on. Again, I'm a new guy, and I think, hey, this must be the way we do business. So I turned the taxi light on. No idea the reason we had to turn our taxi lights on was because they could not see us until we were literally 2 to 3 seconds from landing on the ship. But again, ignorance is bliss. I just tried to fly the best pass I could coming down the chute. Couldn't see anything. And Ninja in my back seat is a little more experienced, and it turned out he was a little more nervous than I was because he was flying with the new guy. So we come down the chute and he's giving me all the sugar calls. Hey, you're looking good, you know, keep it up, you know, keep working hard, you know, a little left, a little right, a little power, come on, we got you. So little did I know that he was so nervous that he was hot mic'd the whole way down. And what hot mic means is there's only one-way transmission. So if the LSOs who are out there to give me a little help if I need to get aboard needed to talk to me, they'd be unable to do so because Ninja was hot mic or one-way transmitting, and so the jet could not receive any commands. So the big deal there is it was truly me and Ninja landing the jet. The LSOs could not help us if they needed to. So again, testament to my ability to be able to get a really, really tough airplane aboard. So we get out of the airplane, we're on the flight deck, and Ninja's hugging me. I got folks running up, and I'm looking around as if, isn't this just what we do? So we get down to the ready room. We show up in the ready room. There's applause. They've got the big eye up, and they're replaying the whole pass. And again, I'm like, wow, well, this is kind of neat. I didn't know I was going to garner this much attention just for a landing. As it turns out, when they play the tape back, you could hear Ninja the whole way down the chute, making me feel good and comfortable coming down the chute. So fast forward, I quickly realized, oh, that's not normal. And clearly, I'm talented enough to get aboard. One of the toughest airplanes to land is the Tomcat aboard the ship. So talented enough to do that. But what it also told me, unlike most airplanes today, it was not fly-by-wire. So for me, the biggest thrill was being able to fly the F-14 myself. And that's what I enjoyed flying about it, because I knew at the end of the day, you know, it was a man's machine, and you're flying it. So that's what I enjoyed most about it, was just flying the Tomcat. It was, you were actually doing the flying.
Okay, we got him.
I fought a brand new Hornet, Marine guy, Top Gun guy, and they were up at the Oak Club at Oceana. So these guys are talking big about we'll spank the Tomcat and all this stuff. So I start talking to this guy and baiting him in. I go, I tell you what, tomorrow we have a 2v2 scheduled out, and you're in that flight, I'm on that flight. I tell you, we'll just make it a 1v1. 1v1, guns only, visual split, fights on the turn-in. And I said, but one engagement, whoever wins, assuming somebody wins, then the other squadron, the loser squadron, is going to buy all the cocktails and all the steamship round and all the shrimp we can eat on Friday night at the Oceana Oak Club. And that's back when the Oak Clubs were still a lot of fun. So we go to the brief, and then next day I launch out. Both squadrons fill the tax range because it's on the tax range. So we go out, and I go out, and I tell them I just need to launch early and go down. Really what I do is I went all the way down to the south end of the range in Whiskey 72 and dumped. I dumped gas down to about 6,500 pounds. And then we do a little intercept, we take apart, we take a split. Meanwhile, I'm going like 300 knots, and then I'm bringing the boards back, but I manually sweep the wings back to like bomb. So he thinks I'm going 450 knots. So I take him out a little farther than normal. Fights on, we turn in, I got him bomb, and I'm at 250 knots, and I go, and then I immediately get below 225. Wings come forward. All the circuit breakers are out, MCB circuit brakes, pulled ox flap circuit breakers. The big boys come down, and then I go to full grunt, and I merge at about 325. I drive him into a one-circle fight. I'm eating him up like a big dog. He's at 450 knots, pulling 7 Gs, and I'm just turning in silent. And then what I hoped he would do, and what he did was, he got antsy, and he pulled at me hard. Bled he bled all his knots, and then I went to vertical, and I had plenty of smack, like 100 knots plus over him, and I go, and he goes up and dies, and I did sort of a double inland thing, came down and gunned him in 42 seconds from the turn-in. And he says, and I said, tracking. Plus everybody in the tax range has seen this. They're going to, and I'm at 800 feet just drilling them. And then he says, okay, let's set up another. I just said, no, I'm bingo. So, and the other deal was, if you lost, you had to do a straight in. You couldn't go into the break. So anyway, that's the things that I loved about the Tomcat, because there was stuff you could do with that airplane to turn it into a true BFM monster. Particularly as you got later, we got the big engines. We got the B models and the D models. And I have a lot of time in those, but that was an awesome airplane. That's what the airplane's supposed to be in the whole time.
The one thing I really liked about the Tomcat better than anything, all the other airplanes I flew, is that the Tomcat had everything. I mean, it had everything. It had 20mm cannon, it had a Gatling gun. It could load up with 3, 3, and 3. Every time we flew on cruise, we threw with 3 Phoenix, 3 Sidewinders, and 3 Sparrows. So I had a long-range radar missile, a short-range radar missile, and a heat-seeking missile. I could carry bombs. I could carry all different kinds of loadout, and it could do it all. And there isn't a lot of airplanes today that can say that. So the complement of the armament, the ability to fly the airplane, it was a stable platform. I think the one thing I probably didn't like about it is the world's largest fighter. So when you're out there fighting the bad guys, you don't want to be the largest target out there. You want to be the smallest target out there. You'd throw a wing up, it was like a huge barn door. And not only would the radar signature be there, but you would just give yourself away. So that's probably the only thing I disliked about the airplane. It was so large you couldn't hide. But the thing I did like about it is it could do everything. You could go fast, you could go slow, you could fight slow, you could turn with a slow airplane. If you were really good, you could sit it on the tail and just maneuver it at about 80 knots. It was a forgiving airplane until you wanted it to do something and it decided it did not want to do that. When that happened, you either paid attention to the airplane or you were in a flat spin, and good luck getting out of that.
The story I really want to tell you about is jumping out of the airplane with Slammer Richardson in August of 1987. Is that my favorite story? No, but it's the one that's the most vivid in my brain because of the feeling like, okay, this is when I'm going to die.
I was in the Navy for 25 years. I flew the Tomcat for probably 17 of those years. And one of the more memorable episodes was as a student pilot going through the F-14 RAG, you have one opportunity to sit in the back seat, and it was what was called the Air Combat Maneuvering One Flight with a flip-flop hop.
We're on this hop, and Slammer is, I think he's a lieutenant or Lieutenant JG. He's a pilot, but he's in the back seat, and we were doing what's called a flip-flop hop. And what we do is we go out and demonstrate to the new students what the airplane could do. Tomcat was difficult to fight. So you had to kind of feel the airplane. In order to feel the airplane, you had to be able to know what you were looking for. And so we take the students out and we would do a bunch of tactical turns, airspeeds, checkpoints. This is what the airplane feels like when you're at corner airspeed. And so you were showing that. And then the other thing that was always a trick was you show them these 3 vertical recoveries. By vertical recovery, I mean you take the airplane straight up, you take it 20 degrees on its belly, 20 degrees on its back, take it to 0 airspeed in all 3 regimes, and you let the airplane flop around and recover. The point was that the airplane would violently depart. And you wanted to teach the students, as I was taught as a student, that don't touch anything, it's gonna come out, you'll build airspeed and you fly away. And it's a confidence builder. Because when you're looking over your shoulder fighting somebody, if you haven't quite looked back in, and the old Tomcat A's just had a steam gauge, so a needle for the airspeed indicator, and you look down at the airspeed indicator and go, okay, I've got 320 knots, I can go vertical, or I've got 250, I can't. Now in the F-14D later on, you could go over the top with 220, which was just bitching. So, I mean, after 2,500 hours in the A, to have the GE-110s and be able to do that, different fight. But in the A, you manage the engines, key point, and you had to really manage your airspeed quite a bit when you went vertical. And so if you pulled and went up and realized, uh-oh, I'm stuck either here, here, or here, the idea was, show me your hands, feet off the rudders, let it flip around, you'll recover and go.
Student pilot, you sit in the back and you'd watch everything, and then you'd come back and you'd swap seats and get a full bag of gas, and you'd go back out and do it again. So we were on the first phase of that training flight, and I'm sitting in the back seat, and Nasty Manazar's in the front seat, my instructor. And we go through all the paces of the Tomcat, and it's flying beautifully, and we're taking it to the edge of the envelope. And we finish all the necessary maneuvers that we were supposed to cover, but we still had some gas left over. And Nasty calls back and says, "Hey, what do you think? You want to do anything else?" I go, "Yeah, let's go see that 0 airspeed departure again."
Okay, lock and harness, up we go, full military power, back up, and this time I am just, come on man, I know this thing's gonna work. So I'm pushing the stick forward and pushing the stick forward, and it is absolutely bullseyed. 0, it's perfect. In the Tomcat, when you slid backwards, you got a lot of blue smoke from the ECS. You could actually, when you knew you were going backwards, our 39-cent piece of string that told us when we were going straight, the yaw string, it actually flipped around. And so it's laying on the nose, and you can watch it flip around the other way, knowing the air was going this way. Air's going that way. Air's also coming in the back of the engines. These are engines that don't like to fly that way. And the left engine stalls. Boom! This big yellow fireball goes right by my left ear. Holy shit. Okay, wow, I mean right there. And what do? Bold face for engine stall, both throttles to idle. Going backwards, still perfectly up, and the airplane's going like this because that engine is full power, this engine is stalled and it's 0. And the stall warning like right here. And so I pull throttles to idle. Of course, right engine stall. Bang! Big yellow flame this way. Ha! So, now it's like, okay, that's scary, that's scary.
And we fall on our back. And as we fall on our back, we start into an inverted spin. And so we weren't really expecting that, but after about 2 rotations or a rotation and a half, the airplane rights itself back up, but stays into a flat spin. And so now we go through spin recovery procedures.
I am, by the way, the high angle of attack subject matter expert in VF-124. I have been trained the most on teaching, briefing, understanding high AOA in the Tomcat, and to include departures. I had just watched a new video that said, when you're in a flat spin regime and you start to see yaw rate, immediately go stick aft into rudder opposite to stop the yaw rate. There was even a video of test airplanes filmed by a guy named Baker up at high altitude. Airplane starts, he does the controls thing, and it kind of wobbles and it recovers. I have this training right here. It's not recovering. We must be about to enter a flat spin.
As a student pilot, I know all the spin recovery procedures, and so we're going back, challenge and response, and the airplane is just staying in the spin. And we're not getting out of it. So I'm calling off altitude, calling off airspeed. I'm seeing the nose drop and telling this to Nasty, and he's telling me what he's seeing, and I'm seeing a flashing spin arrow in the back. And I call out 10,000 feet, because 10,000 feet is the point when you're supposed to eject if you're out of control.
We go through 10,000 feet. Somebody's going to recover this. So Slammer says 10,000 feet. And I went, uh-oh, mandatory eject altitude. Somebody's got to recover this airplane so we can fly home. So I don't say a word. Go back down through, still don't have it. 8,000 feet. 8,000 feet, you got it? And I don't. And now I'm 2,000 feet below eject altitude. I don't know what to do. I said, no, eject, eject, eject. So my cliche for eject was, I'm going to say eject, eject, and then when we used to brief, I'll race you to the handles.
There's really no option at this point. So the first step in the ejection sequence is for the Rio backseater to pull the canopy and blow that. So I did that, and I think I'm the only Rio that has ever done that actually in an ejection sequence. At least that's what I'll say. And no one in this movie can contradict me. But then I decided to lean forward and see where the lower handle is. And the last thing you want to do before an ejection is not be in a perfectly upright and vertical position. Because as you eject, it's about 28 Gs and you go racing out of the cockpit. I didn't get that brief. So I was leaning over when Nasty pulled the seat.
So I reach up, grab the lower face curtain, and I pull. And I do the standard sitting up straight, and I pull the face curtain, I pull down to my chest, and I sit for what seems like minutes. Now, on the way down, I'm looking through these big handles, and the canopy comes off, and it goes boom. slow motion. Brown smoke, no kidding, just like that. Remember, like it was just an hour ago. Comes off, boom, I go, wow, that's cool. And I bring the thing down, I'm on my chest.
In the Tomcat, the back seat goes first. And so as I'm looking down, he pulls the handle and my head stays there, but my ejection seat goes up, and so I get, my head snaps and I get knocked out. And so I don't know what's going on until all of a sudden you have seat man separation, the seat separates from you, and then the parachute automatically opens up. And the opening shot from the parachute woke me up.
And we went from, it was amazing because we went from this both sides yellow lights, violence, don't know what's going on, total confusion, to total just silence. Floating down parachute, nothing going on. Okay, this is nice. And I'm under a chute and I'm not dead yet.
And so all of a sudden, student naval aviator in a chute. And the first thing you do is you grab to hang on to this thing. And the second thing you do is you look down and you see your airplane with nobody in the cockpit and it's spinning. And then you sit there and think, huh. So here I am. And I look over, I see Nasty and he's in his parachute. So we both signaled to each other. And in the recovery procedures, you remember the acronym IROK. You inflate your life vest first, then you release your seat pan so that you have a life raft and your radio and everything available and can climb into a life raft when you're in the water. And then you do options. And the options can be whatever. You save your gloves, you take off your mask, you do other things. One of them is that you can pull these little handles and you can start to steer the parachute.
I look over at Slammer and he's up now and he looks like the poster child. Again, he's been the poster child this entire time. He's the poster child of an ejection. He is hanging on to his risers. He is in a perfect position. He's up, he looks like this god over there. I want to go over there and face Sam. He does the same thing. The other thing about the 4-line release, when you release that thing, is the parachute picks up about a couple of knots of forward velocity. So, here we come.
And so when I get to the point where I start steering, I look across the way and he starts steering as well. And the only time I was ever terrified during this entire event was when both of our parachutes started to aim toward each other. And as I'm turning left, the parachute's turning left, and now we're coming right at each other. And I can, at the same altitude, terrified that our parachutes are gonna hit and we're gonna fall up the rest of the 7,000 feet to our deaths in the water.
Kind of like this. It becomes very obvious we're gonna hit each other in the air under our parachutes. And so I'm focused on him telling me about my raft. I start forgetting about that, going, oh no, 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 no. We go by each other and I swear to God that the parachutes touched. Because we were that close and he just goes by.
And at that point, I'm yanking as hard as I can to turn it. He's doing the same. And as we pass in close proximity, it's like, I'm not getting near you ever again.
Okay, so now it's time for water entry. Again, zzz. This is when I drown. Okay, feet hit the water, coax off perfectly, I dunk below the water, come up, and my raft is right there, nicely inflated right on the top of the water. The report comes back from the E2 that one crew member is in good condition, that'd be me, sitting up. The other crew member is in fair condition because Slammer is a surfer. And whether it's his choice that he didn't sit up or whether he didn't want to, he's laying on his raft paddling towards me like a surfer. He's going, shit, that was awesome! But it looks from the E2 like he's laying on his raft, right? So we're both in great condition. And so Slammer gets over me and I start paddling towards him. And somewhere in this process, my raft goes boom, like this. And I'm like, oh, no, 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 sharks, no, 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 no. And so I start to swim towards Slammer and I go, oh no, sharks, I'm gonna keep my arms in. They can bite him. And so we get over there and we get together and we hook up like the Addams family, you know, so we're sitting like this in the thing, we're tied together and we're going up and down on these 4-foot swells. Very calm, kind of just going like this. We go up on the swell and there is this gigantic frickin' fish right on top of the wave right over here. It has this big nose, it has a fin, it has a long back, it has another fin like this, And I see this facing my direction, Slammer's facing that way, and we go down in the trough. I go, go, Sam, there's this. Come back up on the thing. It's the airplane. The white water was, it had landed flat. It was all the air bubbles. The reserve buoyancy, it had come up. Nose, windscreen, no canopy, tails. The next iteration, it had sunk below the water, and so it had gone away. But that thing scared the crap out of me. I thought it was some big shark. Then 2 helicopters show up out of the blue.
We get rescued and live to tell another story.
Slammer's wife, Beth, didn't talk to me for a decade. A decade. Used to see him on the beach at Del Mar. We'd go down to the same beach. She would not talk to me. Started talking to me and said, "Hey, you didn't kill my husband, so I like you again."
It has been said that the heart will stretch a short love into long memories. For the maintainers and air crew that were seduced by the Tomcat, those simple words became an undeniable truth.
My tour with the Aardvarks in 1991, I was the maintenance officer of the squadron. And at that point ashore, we were running about 30 to 40 man-hours per flight hour to keep the airplane flying. And at sea, it was about 50 man-hours per flight hour. And then you also had a part shortage. So you ended up doing a lot of robs off of other airplanes. So you would cannibalize, we had 2 airplanes down in the hangar, and you'd cannibalize those airplanes to get the parts to fix the airplanes that were up and working. So, where that was probably the real disadvantage of the airplane, the folks that I had to work with, it was probably my most rewarding tour, being maintenance officer in that squadron and having 180 sailors that were working for me. And then they were working, 12, 14, 16 on and off every day, keeping those airplanes flying. And we were making the schedule every day. So it was, the sailors made up for the deficiencies of the aircraft, and most of the folks that worked on that airplane, loved the airplane, and the folks that flied it, it was probably my favorite airplane to fly.
So my favorite thing about the Tomcat was actually the community, the people, and I know that sounds maybe a little cheesy because a lot of people think about the airplane, go, what's great about that airplane, but what it was there was a group of people, whether they're maintainers, they're pilots, RIOs, support folks. I mean, it was, we felt as if we were with the biggest, baddest, best group of people working together. We worked hard, we played hard, we took care of each other. There was a brotherhood and later on a sisterhood in that aircraft that it's indescribable. And to work with people like that and to enjoy life with them, particularly during your formative years, for me, the 20s and 30s and part of my 40s, I loved the community. That's what I liked the best.
The thing that made the Tomcat wonderful is the community. Everybody we had a bunch of characters beyond belief, and the community just developed unto itself and brought out spontaneity and fun and some bizarre attitudes and craziness on occasion, but that was all part of flying a wonderful airplane.
To me, the Tomcat always was the kind of the Harley Davidson of fighters, right? It was if you think of the F-4U Corsair back, in Korea, that was it was the big badass fighter. Today, you look at the Super Hornet and even the F-35, and there's an air-to-ground and an air-to-air capability of it. And so I look back at the Tomcat as really being kind of the last bastion of true fighter pilots. And there was a personality that kind of came with that, with everybody involved in the program back then. And so to me, that was probably the thing I liked most, was just the fighter pilot culture and the bravado and the personality. It's not the same now. I'm not saying that they're bad, but it's definitely different now. But to me, I'm so proud to say that I was a Tomcat guy, and kind of, especially as my first aircraft, because that's kind of like your first girlfriend. It's the one you fall in love with the most and you probably know the most about, and I'm most proud that I was part of.
It's been half a century since the last Grumman Cat first flew, loved by those she served, yet feared by her adversaries. The Tomcat ruled the skies and the hearts of her loyal fans for 36 years. Unfortunately, the dread passage of time finally caught up to her in 2006. Although nothing can stop or turn back the clock, the memories of the Tomcat beat inside like a second heart to all those who flew her. To all those who flew her.
That's a wrap. That's a wrap. All right, we're gonna cut it. All right, cut. All right.
Pouring out in a sea of light. You and I are ultra.
It was very good. Cost me a marriage, but that's another story.
Everyone's looking at me with their mouths open like, dude, you're in a lot of trouble. I'm like, well, you know, what?
Well, I was going to start off with a joke. Is that okay?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, yeah, here's the joke. And it's one of my favorites.
The altimeter would unwind, just and then the nose come back up the horizon like this.
Which story would you like to hear first? They're all true.
The carrier was the only place that we all had to land. There were 17 other airplanes out there that were needing to get aboard.
It was so dicey that I was thinking, I got to get some sleep because I got to go back and do this tomorrow.
It's 6-0 because I'm not used to saying 600 pounds.
600 pounds, yeah, exactly.
So yeah, I called the ball with 6-0.
Because between the back, the shoulder, the hips, and that, oh my God.
But what happens afterwards, a lot of people buying you drinks, autographs, all that cool stuff.
My wife gets pissed off at me all the time in a restaurant because anybody moves, I look.
A bronze statue, full size. Wow.
And then again, I did a barrel roll over the MiG. I yelled at him again.
Say, hey, why do they call you Pester? And it's like, well, just stick around for a few minutes and you'll know.
Another round first for you, my buddy.
We were flying tennis court out there, but it was great for air shows.
We really haven't had a true fighter off Navy carriers since the Tomcat went away.
I want to fly Tomcats, and I didn't know it then, but in typical fighter ready room fashion, they started laughing, and they just said, good luck with that.
My favorite thing about the Tomcat, what wasn't there to love about such a cool airplane?
Flying the F-14 for 12 plus years laid the foundation, I would think, for my success.
I've tried to earn that call sign every day since then, but I don't know if it's worked or not.